Even though I suck harder than a vacuum cleaner at 3D fighting games, I've always had a soft spot for Sega's Virtua Fighter series, and no one can tell me that Jackie and Akira driving around in a Ferrari isn't the peak of comedy. Anyway, after realizing that I've made videos about most games in the VF series, the thought of, wait, I haven't covered Virtua Fighter 3 yet, entered my mind. Determined to cover this game in detail, I went to the store, picked up a copy of the game, and I put it into my console. By the way, all of the info I present to you in this video comes from not only my usual research method of going through old game magazines to showcase primary sources from the 90s by myself, but I'm also including references given to me by Mademan, one of the biggest VF heads I know in Australia. This dude is an OG and he was really nice enough to give me lots of reference material for me to show you all in this video, so a big shout out goes to him and the rest of the VF Australia crew. There's a lot to cover in this video, from updated gameplay mechanics, new characters, and even technology that was developed by Lockheed Martin of all companies. So just like the other games in the series, you know that Sega brought their A-game for Virtua Fighter 3. I was having a discussion with some of the guys in the Virtua Fighter Australia Discord server the other week, and the topic of Virtua Fighter 3 being the quote-unquote black sheep of the series came up. In Australia, we recently had a fighting game major in Sydney that featured Virtua Fighter 5, and someone who had only heard of the series before was like, yeah, Virtua Fighter 3 is the one that sucks, right? Upon being asked for more detail, they explained that Virtua Fighter 3 being the worst game in the series is just what they've heard people say online, so this intrigued me a lot. This game isn't bad, right? I certainly don't think so, but if you're watching this video and you have that opinion, please allow me to try and show you why this game is pretty cool. From Virtua Fighter 3's development all the way to its legacy post-release, I'll be flip-kicking and giant-swinging my way to the bottom of all this, so join me as we cover the crazy world of Virtua Fighter 3. Before VF3 came out, Virtua Fighter 2 was the most recent entry, and this game performed super well. Sega made so much money on this game that if they wanted to, they could realistically buy my entire family and force us all to move to Zimbabwe. So you know they had a huge budget for VF3. VF2 was not only commercially successful, but it was also a critical darling, with both fans and critics adoring the game to bits. With development studio Sega AM2 feeling the pressure, they went all in on making VF3 the best game that they possibly could. As a launch title for the at the time brand new arcade board Model 3, Virtua Fighter 3 represented a massive technical leap forward, not just for the series but also for fighting games and maybe just games in general as a whole. Sega legend Yu Suzuki headed the development of the game, and contained within a piece found in Next Generation magazine's November 1995 issue, there's a quote that explains Suzuki's design philosophy behind the series' graphical style. First of all, I think that the 3D computer graphics were well received as a new medium of expression. Put another way, I think this added a sense of reality to each punch and kick that wasn't there in previous games. As well as expressing human motion, it also made it possible to feel the weight of each movement. When compared to Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat or really any other fighting game at the time that was using sprites, Virtua Fighter's detailed graphics allowed the developers to showcase realistic movements that could run in real time at a stable frame rate. So for Virtua Fighter 3, the goal was to keep this trend going but to make the graphics look even better. Realistic reflections, smoother animations, and higher quality textures all around were the result of this design philosophy, and we can tell that Suzuki and his AM2 team worked really hard to get the most out of the technology they were working with at the time. Virtua Fighter 3 will be a game in which the fighting is closer to actual martial arts, with character motions that are more realistic than either VF1 or VF2. We are obviously proceeding with the aim of surpassing VF2, and we're investigating the specifics now, but unless it surpasses VF2, we can't call it 3. This Next Generation magazine interview was conducted early in the game's development, as when asked about the game's button layout and just kind of general control scheme, Suzuki stated that he'd love to keep the tried and true 3-button layout of the previous games, but this wasn't the case for the final game, more on that later. So, with a design philosophy of utilizing 3D graphics to present realistic visuals, that left the developers to figure out what new gameplay mechanics and characters they'd like to add. Virtua Fighter 1 and 2 had a focus on Chinese martial arts, with characters like Akira and Pai-chan using these martial arts respectively, so it was decided to include more Japanese-style martial arts in VF3. The game's new characters, Aoi Umenakoji and Taka Arashi, use Aiki Jujutsu and Sumo respectively as a result. These characters were first revealed at trade shows throughout 1996, and in Sega Saturn magazine's April 1996 issue, members of the public were given their first glance of Aoi, with the author stating that she wasn't playable at the AOU, which is an arcade showcase in Japan. However, there was a demo of her in motion which people could watch if they wanted to. Later that year in August, Computer and Video Games magazine revealed Taka Arashi and stated that his sash, or Kesho Mawashi as I believe is how you say it, would realistically move around with his body in a match. I know that a character render that looks like this is super duper dated by today's standards, but you gotta keep in mind that back in 1996, this was next level stuff. Another character, the T-1000 inspired Durrell, was the most graphically impressive character in the whole game, and for good reason. Since her entire body is really shiny and reflective, it meant that the game would have to render realistic reflections that appear on her entire body at all times without causing frame rate issues. And because Sega AM2 used what I believe is black magic to make all their games, they were able to do this perfectly. According to an article I found called Model 3, Sega affirms arcade supremacy found in Next Generation magazine. Virtua Fighter 3 represents the latest breakthrough in the development of real-time 3D graphics. The characters' faces, for example, have an incredible degree of animation, their pupils move to follow opponents around the arena, and their mouths can grimace and snarl, in some cases revealing teeth. To accentuate this growing level of humanity, each fighter's breathing is visible, and after performing a particularly demanding attack, their chests expand and contract to accentuate the physical exertion. If that didn't get you excited for the game back in the 90s, then dude, I don't know what would have gotten you excited. This sounds insane. Speaking of getting excited, the hype train for Virtua Fighter 3 back in the day was real, and it was also huge. The same article that I just quoted states that the magazine's photographer found it challenging to get within 50 yards, which is around 46 meters, of the game's demo at AOU 1996. If that wasn't crazy or just impressive enough, Next Generation's October issue reported that during the game's Japanese location test at Tokyo's Sega Joyopolis arcade, what a name, people were willing to wait anywhere between 6 to 8 hours in line to play one round of the unfinished game. If you couldn't tell by now, Virtua Fighter 3 was seemingly going to set the world on fire. Buildings would be leveled, tsunamis would rip through society, and Yu Suzuki would become even more of a video game god when this game was set to be released, destroying the competition. But was the game any fun? Because if this game released and disappointed the series' diehard fans, I honestly think Sega would have had to deal with bomb threats and things of that nature. So now let's move on to Virtua Fighter 3's gameplay mechanics and see how they were handled, not only at the time but also how they feel today by modern standards. Not only did Virtua Fighter 3 innovate by introducing a new button to its control scheme, but it also changed how stages were handled. Instead of having flat, sumo-like arenas that were essentially just large square mats you would fight on, Virtua Fighter 3 introduces uneven environments. Instead of just having to focus on the opponent and the edge of the stage, you now have to take the whole stage itself into consideration. Maybe I can get the high ground here, or maybe I can dodge their attacks so that they fall into the water, or maybe I can even commit homicide here. The stages in this game remind me a lot of the ones in Tekken 4, as both games experimented with uneven terrain as part of their game balance. Another new addition is the dodge button. Normally, Virtua Fighter only has 3 buttons: punch, kick, block. And that's all Sega needed to create a strategic combat system, but they wanted to experiment a bit for VF3. Pressing either up or down in tandem with the dodge button allows you to sidestep, and much like any other 3D fighting game, dodging and then counter-attacking is a big part of Virtua Fighter. Having sound defense is the key to victory, because while the game's simpler strings and combos may work fine at lower to intermediate levels, once you start playing people who really know the game, they'll be able to duck every high, block every low, and sidestep every linear move. I've seen Virtua Fighter's gameplay be compared to a really theatrical martial arts fight from a movie, where there's a combination of both efficiency and style, and I have to agree. Due to it being a video game, Virtua Fighter also has a lot of variety with its fighting styles. Akira focuses on short but powerful strikes, Wolf uses pro wrestling techniques, Sarah uses taekwondo, and Shun-Di day drinks, so there's a chance that one of these fighting styles will resonate with you heavily.
A fucking VB long neck!
For me personally, I've always been a big fan of Wolf as I love grapplers. Being able to ring out the opponent with a big grab will never get old, especially if the environment can get involved somehow. During my research, I was watching tournament footage of this game, and I noticed a trend where people wouldn't go for crazy combos or really long strings. Instead, they played patiently, and they'd only do a few attacks at a time. There was also a time in a tournament that I watched where Pi ducked under Leon's jumping knee because he initiated the move from a higher position, so the game's terrain can impact when and where moves will connect. This tells me that VF3 rewards playing conservatively and not being too rash, or unga bunga as many people like to say. You have to take the stage length and the size into consideration, and combos themselves also don't go on for too long, as you'll usually get a counter hit into a short string before continuing the match. Honestly, it's a really big breath of beautiful fresh air not having to wait 7 years before you can play the game again because you got hit by one launcher. Speaking of not having to wait, rounds in Virtua Fighter only last for around 30 seconds, so matches are over pretty quickly. It's very rare that a match will go to time over, because while the game's time is low, the damage can be really high. You can do some big damage if you make the right read or land a big grab, and it means that the opponent is always one hit away from danger, especially if their back is to the edge. While not everyone is a fan of the new additions to this game, I personally quite like them. The uneven terrain is one of my favorite aspects of Tekken 4, so it makes sense that I enjoy it here too, and I find that it makes the stages more memorable. Instead of just liking a stage due to its appearance or its music, I can also appreciate how it may impact gameplay, and these stages can also make for some really funny moments when you get a ring out. Much like the other games in the series, Virtua Fighter 3 is easy to pick up and play, but very hard to master. You're going to need a PhD in 3D fighting games in order to truly understand the intricacies of the game mechanics, and the process of learning Virtua Fighter reminds me of the first Karate Kid movie. Just like Daniel LaRusso in the beginning of that movie, you're gonna get your poo pushed in, but after lots of dedication and hard work, you too can also giant swing a ninja off a building. I know people say Virtua Fighter has always been ultra realistic and super lifelike, but it also has this element of comedy to it that just, oh man, it's so funny, the ring outs are so good. Much like the previous games, Virtua Fighter 3 was an instant hit. Japanese outlet Game Machine reported that VF3 was not only the 4th highest grossing arcade game of 1996, but it was the highest grossing arcade game in general in 1997. The game had also sold around 18,000 cabinets in Japan, outperforming its rival Tekken 3 in the region, although Tekken 3 did sell more cabinets worldwide. Electronic Gaming Monthly's December 1996 issue also reported that the Amusement and Music Operators Association show, or the AMOA for short, Virtua Fighter 3 was easily the most popular fighting game at the event, and many people rushed towards the cabinet to see the game's new graphics and gameplay additions. If you couldn't tell by now, Virtua Fighter 3 was immensely popular, and it sold well, but what did the critics think? What were the hard review scores for the game? How did the game journalists receive it? Tell me, damn it! Most of the game's reviews were written about the game's home port to the Dreamcast, but as for arcade reviews, I found near perfect scores. Allgame, Electronic Gaming Monthly, and Next Generation gave the game fantastic review scores, and Computer and Video Games magazine even said that it was the best 3D fighting game ever. Everything, from the brand new visuals, audio presentation, and characters were praised, although the supposed lack of innovation in the gameplay department was the only drawback for reviewers. You'd think that adding in uneven terrain and a whole new button would help to separate the game from VF2, but reviewers didn't think so. Later, in 1997, Sega released an updated version of the game called Virtua Fighter 3 TB, standing for Team Battle. This means that you can have more than 2 characters in a battle, and this version was the basis for the game's home port in 1998. This version of the game on the Dreamcast sold 427,021 copies, with 330,631 of them being sold in Japan. As for reviews, the game currently sits at a 79 on Game Rankings, which isn't bad, although it's a bit lower than the other games in the series. Going back to the arcade version of VF3 for a bit, according to a Polygon article from 2015, after Shenmue released, the money that Sega made from both VF3 and Virtua Fighter 4 helped to recoup the lost they experienced from this game not doing very well in terms of sales, to put it lightly. Even though uneven terrain, the dodge button, and Taka himself did not return to VF4, all of this kinda makes VF3 a very unique entry into the series, as it wasn't afraid to innovate the series' gameplay conventions. Even though this game is really old, there are still many people in Japan who love and play this game competitively. If you look online like I did during my research for this video, you can find in-person events and tournaments for the game. While it may not be the most popular game in the series anymore, it's easier than ever to play Virtua Fighter 3 on PC, so if you ever get the chance, I highly recommend trying this game out. I really enjoyed my time with VF3, as I feel that Sega AM2 are the masters of combining visuals, audio, and gameplay to create super memorable experiences. Virtua Fighter has always had its own distinct identity and aesthetic, and at the time, Virtua Fighter 3 was the best iteration of the series. It looked better than VF2, it had more characters, it had more unique stages, and it also introduced team battles to the series, so a gold star to Sega for their efforts. I really wish this game was easier to play on modern consoles, as the only way to do so is to go to the in-game arcade in Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth and boot up the game there. The series, and just VF3 specifically, are really popular in Japan, but I never really hear anyone talk about this game specifically in the West. So if you're out there playing and having fun with these games, good on you. Okay, that's enough ramblings from me, so I think I'm gonna end it here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.